welcome. Sorry for the late start. We are the Marin Coalition, and how many of you are here for the first time? Not too many, but okay, we have a few. Well, you may or may not know we're a 50-plus-year-old organization, nonprofit here in Marin County, doing speaking presentations like this on all kinds of local topics. So hopefully, if you signed up on email, you'll probably be on our email list and you'll get our announcements in the future. If you don't want them, obviously you can let us know and we'll take you off the list. That would be too bad because we'd like to keep you informed of what we're doing. So this is our last, not concert, last program. Sorry, that's my other word. Last program of the season, and we're going to take a summer break and then we get back into it in September. We're still formalizing our dates and programs for next season, but we're hoping in September to be presenting a program on the upcoming elections in November. So look for that. And then after that, the whole rest of the year. That's about all I have to announce, other than if you would like to support us, we're a 501c3 nonprofit, so any donations are tax deductible, and you can do that on our website. Also, one other note, for those who are new, we have an archives page on the website, and you can go to that, and by date, we have lists of all our prior programs going back, I don't know, 10, 20 years or something like that. So if you want to hear what, Supervisor Colbert said last year, you could find a recording of that program somewhere in our database on the archives. So, and those are free, just anybody can go to that website and take a look and watch the whole thing. And we're recording today for that very purpose. So this will be on the internet as well when we're done. Okay, welcome to the program. As I said, it's the final season of the event, and the topic is housing in Marin, affordability, development, and what we can do. As you know, housing affordability consistently ranks as one of the top issues in Marin County for Marin residents. What exactly is affordable housing, however? Who qualifies? How much is needed to add to the supply? And how can communities balance new housing with concerns about traffic, supply levels for gas, water, electricity, neighborhood character, and environmental impacts? Today, we're going to begin to better understand these issues by hearing from our speaker, Jenny Silva. She's the Executive Director of Call Marin Home. The organization is a nonprofit coalition that advocates for affordable, sustainable, and inclusive housing throughout Marin County. Jenny previously served as a volunteer and later as board chair of the Marin Environmental Housing Collaborative, helping to lead the transition into what is now called Call Marin Home. She's been actively involved in housing advocacy since 2018 and served on the Sausalito Housing Element Advisory Committee. Call Marin Home works with nonprofits, developers, and community organizations to expand housing through production, preservation, and tenant protections for an inclusive Marin County. The coalition includes stakeholders from multiple sectors to address workforce housing shortages and affordability challenges. Partners of the organization include Community Action Marin, Habitat for Humanity, Legal Aid of Marin, North Bay Leadership Council, the Canal Alliance, North Marin Community Services, and Homeward Bound. Jenny's also served in leadership roles with several community organizations, including Sierra Club Marin Group Executive Committee and other nonprofit boards. She holds a bachelor's and an MBA from Stanford University. Heard of that one? And she lives in Sausalito. Please welcome Jenny Silva.
Okay, so thank you so much for having me here today. I'm always excited to talk about housing. And this, if I can...
Hang on a second. Sure.
Oh, there we go.
I moved
So
you forward one.
Story actually starts 50 years ago. 50 years ago, Marin made. Oh,
Yeah, I got you moved up a little bit.
thank you. Made one of the most visionary land use decisions in California history. The hills you drive through, the farmland, the open ridge lines, those are not there by mistake. Marin saw the problems that sprawl caused in other parts of California, and they decided to do things differently, and they passed the 1973 countywide plan. And that plan attempted to save the open space and focus development around the 101 corridor. And in one way, this plan was very, very successful. We preserved all of the land in West Marin. However, we failed to build the housing along the 101 corridor, which was a key part of the plan. At the time we created this plan, our population was 240,000 people, and we thought that by today, we would have 800,000 people living here. Instead, our population has barely budged. We have 254,000 people. And we're living the consequences today of that unfinished business. If you drive through Marin today, it looks untouched, but we are changing, even if we can't see it. The community inside the landscape that make our daily life work, the teachers, the nurses, the caregivers who take care of us, are disappearing, not because they want to leave, but because housing costs have made that decision for them. It used to be that Marin County housed our workforce, and now we don't. And those people have to live somewhere. And so what we've done is we've pushed development outside of Marin, and we didn't prevent sprawl by doing this. We just exported it. Those folks are now commuting from outside Marin, 2/3 of our workforce, and it's much worse for the environment than if they were commuting within Marin. So you've probably felt the impacts of this change, even if you didn't directly tie it to housing. Struggling to find a doctor who's accepting new patients, sitting in the traffic on 101. These are both symptoms of the same problem, our lack of housing in Marin County. And that's what we're here to talk about today. So the 1973 plan was right, not just about where to build, but how to build. And really what the plan advocated for was not developing new land, but densifying the land that was already developed. And this slide shows 3 ways to create 188 houses. And I will tell you, it's much easier to see that over on the visual display. So if you haven't had a chance to take a look at it yet, I encourage you after the comments are over. But a single apartment that has 188 units, like one of the San Rafael, not the most controversial San Rafael proposals, but the 13-story one, it's on just 2/3 of an acre, and it only requires 1/10 of a mile of road to service it. The default that Marin County has is represented by the big giant square there, 188 houses on 5,000 square foot lots. That's kind of their baseline development assumption. That requires 22 acres of land to provide the housing for those 188 households. And it requires 2 miles of road to service it to, and so from an infrastructure standpoint, it's a much, much bigger pull on the local government. So the end result of this, and the reason why we didn't do this is because, as I think many here in this room feels, it's really uncomfortable to do that big infill near us, and nobody wants the big infill near us. And so there's been a lot of resistance to following the plan. And so the end result of this is we have built very little housing. We have had the lowest rate of housing production in California for decades. These clippings are from a special section in the Marin IJ that was published 25 years ago in 2001. Every one of those stories could have been run last week, only the numbers are much worse than they were then. And so this is why Call Marin Home was created. We launched last October a transition from what was previously the Marin Environmental Housing Collaborative, from an independent advocacy organization to a housing coalition. Many diverse perspectives, but all united in understanding that the housing crisis requires systemic change, and no single organization can do that alone. And the story of how the coalition came together really starts in COVID. Some of our coalition partners got together when COVID hit and worked and mobilized really fast to take care of our most vulnerable residents, getting them into hotel rooms to quarantine safely, deploying trusted messengers into vaccine hesitant communities. And the result was we had among the best COVID outcomes in the country. Low infection rates, low death rate. And what that taught us was simple, but really important. The infrastructure trust those organizations had built didn't just serve the vulnerable people they served directly, it protected all of us. Marin succeeded because it had invested in its most vulnerable community members. And so it is with housing. By helping the most vulnerable, we also help ourselves. So I'm going to dig now into the numbers and the data of where we are and what it looks like. This slide really represents the housing crisis in a nutshell. We have a huge mismatch between what housing costs and what our population can afford. We have 43,000 low-income households and 17,000 units affordable to this group. And we've got a visual display there that outlines it in much more detail about what the distribution of incomes are and what the distribution of our housing is. And I'm going to talk a little bit about low income and affordable because when it comes to housing, these are often used in non-intuitive ways. So first, let's talk about low income. When you say low income, people often picture someone who's unemployed or working sporadically, someone who's struggling with addiction or mental illness, or maybe a single parent having to juggle part-time work with limited childcare. What they usually don't picture, but should, are folks that are working full-time, working professionals, often with graduate degrees, such as teachers, urban planners, scientists, public interest attorneys, seniors on fixed incomes. In other words, low income is often treated as shorthand for crisis or personal failure, rather than what it actually is, a relative income category. That's why people are often shocked to learn that affordable housing might rent for $3,000 a month, serving a family earning $120,000. When people think of affordable housing as charity for the most desperate, it's hard to reconcile that idea with families who have steady jobs, professional credentials, even if those families are clearly priced out of the local housing market. So now let's turn to affordable, because we often hear affordable for who. And this slide, I'm going to apologize up front. This is really going to get in the weeds, but this is a complicated topic, and I find people are really curious how it works. So I'm going to spend a little bit of time explaining that. Affordable can mean many different things, but in general, housing is affordable if it consumes no more than 30% of your gross income. And there's a few different ways we can get there. Many people, when they hear affordable housing, think primarily of deed restricted affordable housing, or they think of public housing. We have a little bit of public housing, mostly Golden Gate Village, but it's pretty much impossible to build now. And so it's not a big part of the picture going forward, and we have very little of it overall. Deed restricted affordable housing is what we're more familiar with now, and it's developments like One Hamilton that's looking for funding in Mill Valley. It's like the affordable portion of the Oak Hill development, Marinwood, and these are 100% affordable developments. Every unit in there is deed restricted to low income people. Because every unit is deed restricted to low income people, it takes a lot of public subsidy to make those projects financially work. There's not a way for a developer to build all low income housing without a little bit of help. So these projects are difficult to build a lot of. We also have inclusionary housing, which is also deed restricted, and these are affordable units that are included in market rate projects. Now, the nice thing about inclusionary units is there's no subsidy. The subsidy is really happening from a combination of the developer and the people who ultimately live there. But because the subsidy is coming from the project itself, you can only have a pretty small percentage of units that are affordable and still make a project make financial sense. And so for the foreseeable future, we really need both kinds. We need the larger number of units you get at once with the 100% affordable housing projects, and you also need the inclusionary units to stretch our resources. Now, it's important to understand who deed restricted affordable housing serves. These units are primarily designed for low-income households with steady incomes. Not for people with extremely low incomes and not for people who are in crisis or have sporadic income. For households with the lowest incomes, housing vouchers are the most effective tool. And housing vouchers are from the federal government, and they fill the gap in a market rate unit between what the person can afford and what the unit costs. And so those are very expensive to provide. We have about 2,500 vouchers. Given what's going on politically, we're unlikely to get more anytime soon, but they're really, really critical for preventing homelessness. And then there's permanent supportive housing, which is the housing that's really designed to help those that are in crisis and need services beyond just a roof over their head. And then we're going to get to this last column over here, what's called the naturally occurring affordable housing. And that is actually most of the affordable housing that we have in Marin County. And naturally occurring affordable housing just means old apartment buildings, basically. These are multifamily, mostly multifamily that was built long ago. And so they rent at the lower end of the market at a rate that is affordable for low income people. Now, the challenge that we have here in Marin, because we have built so little housing over the last 50 years, our stock of the naturally affordable housing is getting low. And because we have such a mismatch between what people make and the housing available, it's getting bid up. And so half of that naturally occurring affordable housing is at risk for becoming non-affordable over the next 5 years. And so when I really dug into the data and figured out what was going on, I was like, well, 43,000 low-income households, 17,000 units, these people are living here. How does that actually work? And so next I'll talk about that. So of the 43,000 low-income households, we have 17,000 that are in housing they can actually afford. The next largest group, and a pretty big group, are low-income homeowners. And these are typically people that have owned their homes for 30, 40, maybe even 50 years. And these households have much greater housing security than renters, which is fairly obvious. But that does not mean that they are immune from displacement. For many of these low-income homeowners, they're in very old homes at this point, homes that are at least 40 years old. And so it becomes very difficult to pay for the ongoing maintenance that is needed to keep the house in shape. It can also, these households are also not ADA accessible, and as people get older and they have mobility needs, there's often a need for a great deal of investment so that the home remains safe to live in. And often the low-income homeowners just don't have the resources to do that. So we still see displacement of those folks, even if they own a home here in Marin that on paper is worth a lot. After that, we have a number of people living in overcrowded units. That's what you see in the Canal District. Many of those apartments are not actually affordable, but people make it affordable by doubling up or tripling up. And then we have homelessness. A lot of people think homelessness is a problem of mental illness or addiction. Housing costs is the #1 predictor of homelessness in your community, and there are people who just can't afford to live here. And then lastly, we have what's called hidden housing or informal housing. And this is a combination of people living in extended stay hotels, living in substandard housing as they were on the ranches in West Marin, or even in shipping containers or shack, which are actually more common than I realized when I got into this in West Marin. And so far, my conversation has been primarily around affordability, but it is important to realize that accessibility is a huge issue here in Marin too. We have an old population and we are aging rapidly, but, and as we age, our housing needs change and our housing stock is not adequate. And again, this goes back to the age of our housing. Single family homes, which is the bulk of our housing, are not required to be built to accessibility standards. And almost all of our multifamily housing was built prior to ADA requirements. And so we have very, very little accessible housing. And I know personally, and I'm sure many of you know personally, folks that spent all their adult life in Marin and just realized there was no place adequate that they could move to. And so they left, not because they wanted to, but just because they needed someplace safe that they could stay in. And then I just want to point out one other implication of our older housing stock. From an environmental perspective, old housing is far inferior to new housing. It is far less water efficient, far less energy efficient, and highly under-recognized. New multifamily housing is vastly more fire safe than either single family homes or old multifamily housing. So all of this together, and I know that was a lot, but all of this together adds up to, we have the highest rate of displacement within the Bay Area. And in my work, I talk to a lot of people, and I've heard some really tough stories of people that have lived here for all of their life. They're in their 70s or 80s, and they're coming to the realization that they can't stay here. And they never thought that they would be vulnerable to homelessness because they thought of it as a problem for people that were having problems, and they weren't having problems, just their rent was moving faster than their incomes. And a lot of sense of betrayal of those people, that they put so much into this community and they're looking at starting over at age 80 in a brand new place that they don't know anybody. So it is a challenge. So let's look at where we are today. So the good news is approvals are way up. We have 6,000 housing units that have been entitled here in Marin County. That is the highest level of approvals that we have had in decades. However, approvals alone don't create housing. Many projects are approved and they never get built. Permitting is the key step that moves a project from approval into construction. And that's what the orange bar there represents. And you can see it's really, really small. Historically, only about 1/3 of approved projects actually get built in Marin. Now, some people worry about the ratio of market rate housing to the affordable housing and wish that all new development could be affordable, but 100% affordable housing requires a great deal of subsidies, and there's not any signs that we're willing to tax ourselves to the extent that we would limit development to affordable housing. And it's also important to remember that today's market rate housing is tomorrow's naturally occurring affordable housing. There's actually a really important role for the market rate housing. And I'll also just point out, I often hear we don't need those apartments that rent for $4,000 a month. If you go and look at the distribution of our housing today versus incomes, you can see we actually do need those apartments that rent for $4,000 a month. If we don't build them, the people that can pay that are going to be squeezing out the people that can only afford the less expensive apartments. So Marin is extreme, but we aren't alone. All of California is experiencing a housing crisis. At this point, there is not a pathway for households of the median income to become homeowners in California. Or I should say the primary pathway is through inheritance. And today in Marin, already 1/4 of our home transfers are through inheritance. And due to Prop 13, the keeping the low tax base when a property is inherited, that has really troubling implications for our tax base over the longer term. So all of this together is to say that the folks in Sacramento are under extreme pressure to solve this problem. The housing element was created in 1969 to solve the housing crisis. It's obviously much worse today than it was back then. We relied on incentives for many, many years, and now the state is moving to more punitive ways, or I should say stronger incentives, punishments for jurisdictions that aren't doing their part. This diagram shows all the housing laws that touch housing in different ways that were passed just last year. So it is a lot. And I will say it is a real strain on our jurisdictions. We have very small jurisdictions. Many only have one or two planners. Trying to absorb all this and getting it into our local codes is a real problem. But again, all that legislation not yet translating to housing. This is an update on how we've done on our housing element, which is an 8-year plan. Many of you may have heard of it. We're supposed to be building 14,000 units in this 8-year period. So far, the vast majority of what we approved have been accessory dwelling units, sometimes known as granny flats or ADUs. And you might ask, why is this happening? Why hasn't it worked yet? And for the most part, to get these laws passed, there's lots of strings and caveats and exceptions. And so things really have to all come together just perfectly in order to make a law apply. I've heard a lot, and I'll just say Marin residents push back aggressively and creatively against these laws. We have a lot of resources here, so we are very effective at fighting projects we wouldn't want to see. And so this goes back to our beginning part about the 1973 plan and why we didn't follow the plan. And the creators of the plan really underestimated what it would take to build housing in our communities. And I just like to show this because this is a plaque of the Golden Gate Bridge. I hadn't realized this till recently, but these people fight these changes in their built environment kind of no matter what it is. We hear it for 3-unit proposals, 100-unit proposals, 20-unit proposals, and 200-unit proposals. But when the Golden Gate Bridge was first proposed, there were over 2,000 lawsuits to stop it. There were complaints that it would ruin the view. There were suggestions that it would never survive the strong tides in the area, and it was an environmental disaster waiting to happen. It's really hard to imagine what the Bay Area would be like today if those lawsuits had been successful. And, you know, honestly, how many of us would be living here today if we didn't have the Golden Gate Bridge? Probably not many. We go to a lot of public meetings and we hear consistent concerns that are raised about growth. And these are very understandable issues. And I'm going to dive into two of the ones that we hear most frequently. But again, it doesn't matter what the proposal is. It's a similar set that we hear: traffic, fire, water, too dense, out of scale, infrastructure strain. And so there is no doubt you change your neighborhood, there are going to be some changes. But I think it's helpful to reframe what are the risks really versus what are the benefits that we're going to get out of the housing. And we can see over time that often our feared risks don't pan out in the end. A good example is the Wind Cup project in Corte Madera. This proposal was to convert a styrofoam cup manufacturer to housing, 180 new apartments in an already developed area, LEED certified, so environmentally good, next to a bike path, 5 minutes from the Larkspur Ferry, walking distance to school and jobs. By every smart growth metric, it was exactly what you'd want to build and where you would want to build it. Our former Marin Environmental Housing Collaborative Board Chair, Bob Pandoli, was actually the planner in charge of this project, and he still has PTSD from it. The opposition was brutal and it was personal. He would get accosted in the grocery store saying, "Why are you trying to ruin Marin?" It was really, really tough. And the complaints were the usual ones that we heard. It was going to be nightmare traffic. It would strain the water supply. It was out of scale with the neighborhood. Well, it opened in 2017. and it's now Mount Belton, and it's just fine. It's there. I haven't seen I've never had somebody say we would be better off if we had kept that as a styrofoam cup manufacturer. The traffic catastrophe did not materialize. Property values continued to rise. And so even though the fears are real and legitimate, it's important to look at what actually happens and to moderate that way. And I want to spend a little bit of time on traffic because this is the number one issue that always comes up. And it's worth taking seriously. I drive up 101 all the time and it's a nightmare. Nobody enjoys doing that. The instinct that housing is going to cause traffic is understandable. The idea, more homes means more cars. But that's only true if you ignore where people are already coming from. The workers who staff our hospitals, teach our kids, serve our food, that would be moving into local affordable housing, they're already on our streets driving, and they're having to drive much more if they're coming over the bridge and driving through Marin than they would if they had housing that was close to their jobs. When we chose not to build, we didn't avoid the traffic, we actually created it. And here's what the research actually shows. Building affordable housing near transit is one of the absolute best things you can do to mitigate traffic, to reduce traffic. Far more effective than increasing bike lanes, increasing frequency of transit, although those are both good things and we should be doing those too. But if you really want to reduce traffic, putting housing near where people are going is the number one thing you can do. And even if people still need to get in their car, if they're only having to drive a half a mile instead of 5 miles, that's a win for the number of cars that you're passing on the street. And then I want to talk a little bit about fire risk, because this is something that's very surprising to a lot of people, and again, somewhat counterintuitive. But new infill housing can actually reduce our fire risk overall. Most of our housing stock was built in the 50s and 60s under fire codes that would be unrecognizable today. Wood-shaped roofs, vents that funnel embers directly into attics. New multifamily housing is built to entirely different standards. Ember-resistant vents, non-combustible materials, fire-resistant roofing and siding, mandatory sprinkler systems. These features don't just protect the individuals that are inside the building, they're features that slow the spread of firing to neighboring properties. So everybody is better off when they have a nice fire-resistant building in their neighborhood than if they have a nice wood-shaped roof next door. So in many respects, that new apartment building on a commercial corridor is going to be far more safe than the single family home that's next door. And then I'll just add to that the greatest risk in Marin isn't in downtown San Rafael, and it's not on the 101 corridor. It's in the wildland urban interface. And when we don't build here in Marin, we're pushing the sprawl into Sonoma, into places that are really much more dangerous than what we are dealing with in our downtown areas here. And I'll just finish this by saying fire risk is real. And I've talked to some of the fire chiefs here. They take it seriously. Evacuation planning matters, and we need to hold our cities and county accountable for doing a good job on solving these problems and having good plans in place. But blocking multifamily housing along the 101 corridor it increases our risk and redirects the growth to places where it's much more dangerous. And I just want to say we can do better. I often hear that Marin, is unique in the things that make it hard to build here. But I think Berkeley is a really great case example. 10 years ago, they were really used in the same breath as Marin as a place that was very anti-development, difficult to build. They had many of the same issues that we do, in that the easy places to develop had already been developed. They have fire, they have hills that are very high fire risk, some of the same challenges. But they have really undergone a transformation over the last 10 years. They have worked to implement middle market housing zoning that allowed financially viable projects and made it very easy for them to get approved. They work to ensure faster and more predictable approvals. And they have become known as a place where it's actually easy to get and predictable to get a project done. And so there's much more happening there than there is here. And you can see it in their permits. They've permitted far more housing than we have. So till now, I've talked a lot about the problems, and I'll talk about how we look at changing this. Policy makers who work on housing affordability organize their thinking around what they call the 3 Ps: production, preservation, and protections. Production is building more housing. It's probably where we've had the biggest gap. I mean, zoning that allows multifamily housing in more places, and it means making it easier to approve the housing that does get proposed. Preservation means protecting the affordable housing that we already have, and particularly taking that naturally occurring affordable housing and converting it to deed restricted housing going forward. It's much less expensive to convert an already affordable housing to deed restricted housing than to build new housing, and it's a good way to ensure that we increase our base of affordable housing here. And protection just means keeping the people housed that are housed here, already here. Anti-eviction measures, stopping displacement before it happens. So 50 years ago, Marin made a deliberate choice. We protected our open space and we tried to limit sprawl. And it was a good idea, but we didn't build housing in the places we planned for it. And we're now experiencing the consequences. Us as Paul Marin Home has gathered as a group and said, what are the levers that we can move? What are the most important things we can do to impact this problem? And the first thing on our list is we need to find more affordable housing. Deed restricted affordable housing cannot be built without public subsidy, and that's not a political opinion, that's just math. We have projects right now, 1 Hamilton in Mill Valley, 240 Tamil Vista and Fort Madera, that have been entitled for years who have not been able to get funding yet. So making more funding available will allow us to get housing built now. There is a proposed state bond measure on the November ballot that would be a meaningful start, but Marin also needs its own dedicated funding. And this is for several reasons, not just because we need it, but local funding makes us competitive for state and federal dollars, and we are not as competitive as we can be right now. And it also gives us control over the developments that are built. When we're putting our own money in it, we have more say than if we are relying completely on outer sources. We need to build housing faster. We still have the lowest rate of housing production in California. We'd like us to move from the bottom to, at least the top 75%. That would be a start. We have projects that have been in the process for over a decade, and that's really not caution, that's obstruction. And if we want to solve this problem, we need to build, and that it just needs to be done. And then lastly, we need to protect the people who are already here. Housing stability shouldn't be a privilege that only homeowners enjoy. We've recognized that Prop 13 matters because people need to know that they can stay in their homes. Renters need the same stability, and right now, most of them don't have it. Nevada just enacted the strongest just cause ordinance in the county, and it happened because of what happened at Roman Court. Residents who had paid rent for years faithfully were given 5 days to leave because the landlord had neglected the property and it was red tagged. There was widespread recognition across the political spectrum that that was simply wrong. And we believe those protections that have been extended to renters in Nevada should be extended to all renters in Marin. So we'll just leave with this. We feel the impact of our unfinished business every day. And the doctor you can't get an appointment with, the restaurant that closes at 8, the caretaker you can find, the kids who grow up and can't afford to move back. Our solutions are somewhat simple, but they're not easy. Marin can do it. We have done hard things before. We restricted 85% of our land from development when folks said there was no way that could be done. During COVID, we organized and we achieved outcomes that were the envy of the country. Housing's worth the effort, and let's do it. Thanks.
Okay, I'm sure there are no questions, right? So we can just, yeah.
Okay.
All right, who's got a question? We'll bring the mic over to you. Come on, you're all wondering. Mr. Spotswood.
Yeah, the story in the paper the other day about affordable housing being built in San Francisco that used pre-manufactured components. It seemed like a good idea, but I know it's strongly opposed by building trades unions. What are your thoughts on permitting construction of housing using off-site pre-constructed components?
We are believers that we need to build housing of all types, and that would include manufactured housing, or I know they don't like to call it that, pre-constructed housing. And I will say not all of the building trades are actually opposed to it. The Carpenters Union does support it, not in all cases. They prefer if it's actually built in California so that it's some of our local people who do it. But there is a recognition, not universally across labor, but more and more of the unions are realizing their people cannot afford to live here either, and that something needs to be done. Many times in Marin, it can be a little bit tricky because we do have a lot of topography hills, there's a lot of hills, and so it's not always something that can be deployed. But when it can be, Paul Marin Home, we support more housing, and we are very interested in looking at creative ideas on how we can make it happen.
Question over here.
The biggest issue that has concerned me for years is water. We only have so much storage of water. And I think we're very, very close to the limit of the people we already have here, 258,000. What plans are there for getting enough water to add, if we add another 100,000 people? Where's the water going to come from? And how are we going to deliver it?
All right, so 100,000 is a lot. I don't think anybody has that in the immediate plans right now. We're just looking at, let's hit our 14,000 that's in the housing element. And actually going from 200, and we have lost population. So we are below our population peaks right now. Water is complicated. There are a lot of issues with it. One thing that is underappreciated is new housing is far, 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 far more water efficient than old housing. A new home that's built, and especially a new apartment that's built, will use single digits of water compared to an old ranch home that's here in Marin. So the greatest way to conserve the water and make it last better is to upgrade our existing homes that we have so that they're much more water efficient. That will have a far greater impact than a new apartment building that serves 200 people. There are things that we should be doing to prepare for drought. We need to do those things regardless of what happens with our population. When we have good water years, we're fine. Right now, we're not in a drought, we're fine. When we were in the extended drought a few years ago, the fact that we hadn't built housing wasn't going to save us. We were still facing water issues. And so our water districts, their job is to make sure we have the water that we need. And I know the Marin Water District is looking at that right now. So we do need to do planning for it. It's not, and I'm not a water expert. I see other people in the room who probably know much better than I do what needs to be done. But I'll say the impact of the level of housing that we're talking about building right now is really not a material aspect of how we plan for droughts. We are going to be impacted if there's a big drought, whether or not we have more population, and the impact of the additional population is gonna be very, very small.
Question over here.
Hi, I had two points I wanted to make. In regard to Berkeley, I knew some of the folks that were very involved in Berkeley and in housing issues. But a major aspect in Berkeley, and I think it applies here in Marin too, but it's creating a community. And I don't hear the word community. I hear housing and kind of just technical stuff. I mean, you know, we could go on and on with aspect, but related here in Marin, people in this generation, baby boomer, whatever, look at the systems, look at the earth, look at what kinds of water, and talked about things about population control or how much the population. Yes, there haven't been as you know a big growth here, but I think people moved here for a reason. And it has to do with the incredible environment, the different systems here, and looking at the various systems too, what the carrying capacity is of the land or of the earth, yeah, and looking at what the population is. And we were hearing things about India having tremendous population growth and the difficulties they were facing, and also in China. And so I think some of what you see is in regard to that. I mean, the Sierra Club years and years ago was against having a train. They didn't want endless housing in Sonoma or to, you know, there were all sorts of kinds of issues, and we could go on and on. But my reason for bringing this up is I think that those are kind of conversations I don't hear taking place, and I think maybe they need to. I think that people in the baby boomer generation, at least in Marin, I can't speak for everyone, but I think that was something that has been a very important topic. Thank you.
Yeah. You are right that there were many concerns several decades ago about overpopulation and the impacts of that. These days you hear the opposite much, that we're not having enough babies and that people need to be, that we are experiencing a population decline, and that's going to, you know, births are at below replacement rate here now in the US, and that's going to create a lot of social problems. So it is true that was a very hot topic for a while, but it's a little bit, the world has changed dramatically since then. And even Mexico now has a below replacement birth rate. It's pretty astounding. If you look at the stats across the world, it is completely different than when I was in elementary school. It's really, really changed. You know, and here in Marin, when you start talking about carrying capacity of the land and what we can support, we are very, very low density. Like, we are not close to carrying capacity of the land here. I'm not sure what that means, but you just go over the bridge and you've got 800,000 people in 49 square miles. Here we have 250,000 people in 540 square miles. And there's there's a lot of room here. And one of the first visual I did was the beaded maps over there, which I often heard, you know, we have no space, we can't build here. We have very low density. There is a lot of room that we can actually build here in Marin, and we don't have to touch the open space. We can do it all by densifying what we've already built in Marin. So,
and by the way, that's a good reminder that we do have these visuals to take a look at before you leave today. So Jenny was very kind in bringing those over for us to take a look at. So don't miss that. All right, a couple more questions.
Thank you, Jenny. I'm always learning new things every time you present. My name is Dariush Davidi. I serve on the chair of Police Advisory Accountability Committee. And one of the concerns we have right now is we're trying to hit 68 police officers and we're stuck at 58. And the top reason is what you mentioned, people cannot afford to live here. So if anything, safety is a top priority. And that comes up a lot. If there's a major disaster, if the bridges fall, I mean, I don't wanna, scare you, but we want, our people commute from Stockton, Petaluma to come here to serve our, first responders. So I think this is another added benefits to have safety here. So I just want to thank you and just kind of plant that seed as well.
Thank you. I haven't heard that stat before. That's a little alarming.
Pam, you had a question?
Hi, Pam Hicks. I was on the planning commission in Fairfax for 9 years back in the 2000s. And the big thing was affordability then. And this is the same stuff. It's the same story. They're building big, huge things with 10 to 20% of affordability. That's really wrong planning and poor planning. So I do not know why, unless nobody wants to invest the money or there's scams, or it's not clear to me. But unless you get some money, and they used to have redevelopment programs way back, it's all gone. So I really would advise you to look at where is the money coming from? Where can you get more money? I have 2 kids and they stay at my house. I have a couple of extra bedrooms, but they're not gonna live here. Secondly, I'm a retired nurse and I commuted from Fairfax to San Francisco for 16 years. The bus took 2 hours to get there one way. Otherwise it'd be 45 minutes. So there's a transportation, there's also these infrastructures to me that still really need to be improved or looked at. Now, when you say that people, I kind of get the attitude of that to be a Marinite is really not okay. I moved here for the land to be, I started the open space committee in Fairfax. And I knew the commute would be probably difficult. I could have worked at Marin County, which I did part-time. But what I'm saying is, like the woman said about community, it is different communities. And I think if you wanted to catch more flies with honey, you might talk about the communities here, which are very strong and very much aware of the change. Thank you.
Any comments?
I will just say we are big believers that we need more money so that we can fund building more affordable housing. I think we are not going to be able to meet our housing goals without it. And I will agree. This was a more technical talk today. I talked about the data, but I agree with you. Community is really, really important. And for community, we need people. And we want to make a Marin where the people that work here can live here. And I think that's really important for a strong community. But thank you for raising that. I think it's an important point.
Hi, my name is Rebecca Schwartz-Lesberg. I'm the Executive Director of the Marin Conservation League. I wanted to thank you so much for this. It's housing, if you ask me, housing is one of, if not the largest environmental issues facing the state of California. We know that denser housing means less development pressure on our open space, which is a way to protect biodiversity. I mean, when you're talking about safety, these are all housing issues. Biodiversity protection is a housing issue in addition to the climate benefits. On the question of water, from the gentleman here, there's so much more that Marin can be doing in terms of recycled water, non-potable reuse, stormwater capture, advanced metering, leak detection. So it's not just a matter of how we get more water into the county, which we also have more opportunities with things like intertide projects, but there's a way to use our water better. My question is, I feel like historically, and maybe even today, that housing advocates and environmental advocates were often either pitted against each other or shown as being on 2 sides of an issue, when the reality is we are on the same side. So I'm wondering, is the environmental community in Marin doing enough on this issue? And if not, where are there more opportunities for collaboration?
Well, I love seeing that we have both Greenbelt and the Marin Conservation League in here today. So I think it is still somewhat contentious within the Marin County environmental community. And so there is more that needs to be done. As Scott mentioned, I'm on the Sierra Club Marin Executive Committee, and I can say within the Sierra Club, there's very differing opinions on the role of housing in this. My opinion is similar to yours, that it is really, really critical. It's a critical environmental issue. And so I think there's a lot more that the environmental community can be doing to educate people of the impact of housing on the environment, why they're not pitted against each other, but they actually are work very, very closely together. And we can't meet our environmental goals if we don't build more infill housing. We just can't. We can't reduce emissions. Most of our emissions are from vehicle travel. The number one way to reduce vehicle travel is by putting housing where people are spending their daily lives. So.
Question over here.
Hi, my name is Susan Clark, and I want to thank you. Yes, I have had the opportunity both in Marin and San Mateo County and other places to do community engagement about housing. And what are the conditions where a community can see, oh yeah, maybe we do want a little more occupational diversity. I want a quick sidebar. Back in the day, I was on the San Rafael Parks and Rec Commission, which wasn't housing, but you talk about Marin creativity. We had so many people who didn't want the Albert Field, modified so that the Pacifics could play. And I think one of the testimony was there will be defecation in the streets. It was just going to be a mass riot. So, I mean, there is a latent fear. And some of the research that I was able to do, we can go deeper into it, I'll tell you, about 12 years ago it was basically, in addition to I'm worried about my property values and I'm worried about all these things, it was people were really scared of who was going to move in. And if you want the longitudinal study, it's called fear of low income behavior. And so there's this perception that, well, we don't want those people. But your chart, when you show the occupational diversity, so when people are talking about community and connective tissue is my 30-year passion, what kind of community do we want? And we all know some of the streets in Marin where the only people who can afford those houses are serious financial folks. Well, now a certain kind of private equity. I mean, you have this narrowing of what kind of occupations can live. And I would ask those who are like, well, but we love our community character. How is it going to work when you hollow out and hollow out? And on a personal level, my daughter, we had city employees who could live here and they understood the community in ways that the people commuting in just can't. And so I really want people to understand that if you sat down next to that future resident, and the future residents aren't usually at the planning commission meetings, they don't even know. These are these wonderful people that you don't know. And then we have this advocacy that we're told, well, we're all racist, creepy people. And it's like, I just think we're really not getting honest about occupational diversity. So in addition to all of this excellent information, and can go off into everybody's favorite advocacy area, I'd like us to talk about the elephant.
Wow. Thoughts, or we'll keep going? We started late, so we'll kind of go over a little bit with some additional questions, if that's okay, because you're all asking some very interesting ones.
I live in Corte-Madera. I'm actually a builder, but that was an amazing presentation. I mean, let's give it up. I watch a lot of these. This is one of the best ones I've ever seen. So I just want to put it out there.
Thank you. And I'll just remind everyone, this is on our archives page as of tomorrow or whenever we get it up there. It'll take a day or two. And then you can send that link to anyone that you want and anyone can watch it.
Thank you. I wanted to thank the last speaker for naming fear. It's a powerful emotion, especially when it comes to change. My name is Jessie Roundtree. I work with Greenbelt Alliance as the Marin Resilience Manager. We support housing as a really essential climate solution
Another emotion I want to name is overwhelm. These problems are huge. It has a history of systemic challenges. So Jenny, what do we do with, we need private developers, we need more money, we need more efficiency. That's enough to make anyone feel overwhelmed. And I worked on climate change for 20 years, so I know that emotion. What can we do with our own time, with our own voices? What's something to make action locally, beyond coming to see great talks like this? Well, when it is easy to get overwhelmed, especially you read the paper these days, it's really easy to get overwhelmed with everything that's going on. But my strong belief is you don't have to do everything. Just pick something that resonates with you. You don't have to try and solve everything, but if you think funding is really important, then reach out and start looking at and support the efforts to build more funding. If you really want to see more affordable more 100% affordable housing, then funding is the number one thing to work on. At Marin Home, we have a weekly email that goes out that says everything that's going on at all the local public meetings that have anything to do with housing. We're raising issues that are coming up. And so if you're feeling overwhelmed, one thing you can do is just sign up for that newsletter and watch until something really tickles your fancy and then get involved there. And I'll also shout out, Jesse's doing a great program June 30th for teachers. That's going to provide some advocacy training. I think Greenbelt's going to do some more of those, but I think some advocacy training can be a really great place to start if you're overwhelmed too. And lastly, I will say, I'm a little fanatic about this. I'm always happy to talk about housing. So if you want to get involved, but you're not sure where, reach out and I'm happy to talk and tell you what's going on and see if we can find a good fit.
Good question here.
I was just gonna add, I'm Derek Nell with the Nevada Unified School District, and we are actually trying to build housing on our surplus properties, so just make people aware of the fact that your local school district can be part of the solution here. I don't want to put Jenny on the spot with like tough questions and how to solve this or that, but essentially, we are suffering a great deal, which is resulting in lower student outcomes due to the high turnover rate. Quick stat, in the 70s, almost 30% of bachelor degrees went into education as a career. That number is now below 5%. It's very competitive for talent when it comes to teachers and other instructional leaders. And we have such a problem with this that we've decided that we have to take it on ourselves within our own community. It's similar to putting us in a situation where we have to provide transportation, we have to provide mental health, we have to provide breakfast and lunch, and now we have to provide housing. So this is an issue that all of us really need to face and take on. There's some talk about the police living outside the community. Close to 66% of our employees live outside of Marin. And so when you actually, it's interesting to me, I'll just say, I had a meeting with city staff and personnel. Not a person in that room actually lived in the city of Novato, and they were the ones making decisions about what should or shouldn't be, or the process should be for developing housing. So in all fairness to them, their careers, and I know they care, but essentially what I'm saying is, we as Marinites need to get together. We have to figure this out. We're not talking about building 1 million houses. We're talking about just enough, the right percentage, the right size and amount, adequately that fits our neighborhoods to serve our working people. And you certainly need to put your public schools in that area of need.
All right, we had another question over here, and I think we'll probably need to wrap it up pretty soon.
Hi, Michael Borstein. I think one of the problems that I've been dealing with for many years in the Ross Valley Sanitary District is vocabulary. And one of the problems I think we have is a very severe lack of aquifer water in this area. We have no below ground water. We have the reservoirs, but they're only as good as the rainfall that fills them. You make them bigger, that's terrific, great idea, but if you don't fill them with water, then you just have empty reservoirs sitting up there. A few years ago, we came within weeks being completely empty. Phoenix Lake was empty. All the reservoirs over there were empty, and we were we were within weeks of passing an $80 million budget to put a pipeline again across the Richmond-San Antonio Bridge to bring water from East Bay Mud. And I think that one of the things we need to start doing for future housing and all that kind of development is to think about changing it so it's not wastewater anymore. There's no water that can be wasted. We can take it right over here at Central Marin Sanitation Agency, and we can treat it and become potable water. We take 8 million gallons a day, dry weather flow every day, and we pump it out, we clean it up, pump it out into the bay. We can take 8 million gallons a day, treat it, and it can become potable reuse. And then we don't have to worry about it anymore. We've got plenty of storage, and also they want to bring it down from the Russian River. That's terrific until we have the first really big earthquake, and all of a sudden we don't have those pipelines to bring the water from up there down to here, and they can shut us off in the same way that we do with our water here. As they say, we don't have enough. So I think we need to start thinking about a change in vocabulary. That it's okay to put housing in some of the places you're talking about, but that's okay. It's okay to drink water that is completely clean and it's completely potable. Because I listened to, I'll finish up, listen to a guy from UCLA talking that the misconception is that we have the idea we have fresh water in the world. Every bit of water that we drink every single day is recycled. It has been recycled for billions of years. This water is the same water that the dinosaurs were drinking. Think about it. It is. It is. It's dinosaur water.
Well, I get mine from Fiji, and that's fresh, so, All right, everyone, I think we gotta wrap it up. Let's hear it for Jenny one more time. This was not only an amazing presentation, it was an amazing response from the audience, and I think everybody on here is on 5 different boards. It's a pretty incredible audience, so thank you for coming. Whoa, gosh. Thank you for coming. Check out our website for the future events starting in September. Hope to see you all again, and stay cool.